The obsidian pillars of the glass hall throne room rose like frozen titans, their polished surfaces catching and reflecting the orange-red glow from the molten lava that flowed beneath the transparent floor. Kyle Raren stood before the Empress's dais, his worn leather jacket smeared with the ash and stardust of a dozen fringe worlds. He could feel the stares of the courtiers, their whispers like insects buzzing at the edges of his consciousness. Empress Lorena sat upon her throne of volcanic glass, her posture rigid, her face a perfect mask of imperial serenity. The golden circlet upon her brow caught the lava light, making it seem as though flames danced around her head. Her deep blue eyes, however, remained cold as they fixed on Kale. "The Empress acknowledges the presence of Kale Raren, former envoy of the Pyroterran court," announced the herald, his voice echoing through the chamber. Kale suppressed a bitter smile. Former envoy. As though his years of service to her throne, to her, could be reduced to such a sterile title. "You have been granted audience to deliver a message," the herald continued. "Speak it, and then depart." The silence that followed felt oppressive. Around the throne room stood the silent guard statues, warriors encased in ceremonial armor that concealed any hint of humanity. They might as well have been carved from the same obsidian as the pillars. Kale stepped forward, his boots making no sound on the transparent floor. Beneath him, he could see the rivers of magma that powered Pyroterra's capital, a reminder of the volatile forces that had shaped this world, and perhaps his relationship with the woman who ruled it. "Empress Lorena," he began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions in his chest. "I come bearing a message from the Coalition of Fringe Worlds. They wish for me to inform you that they cannot accept the new trade restrictions imposed by your council. They believe these measures disproportionately punish worlds already struggling to survive on the borders of your empire." Lorena's expression did not change. Her fingers, adorned with rings of platinum and fire opals, remained motionless on the armrests of her throne. "They have authorized me to negotiate terms that would be mutually beneficial," Kale continued. "A compromise that would—" "We did not ask for negotiations," Lorena interrupted, her voice as smooth and hard as the obsidian around them. "You were permitted to deliver a message. You have done so." Kale felt a familiar frustration rising within him. This was the Lorena he had come to know in the final days before his exile. Unyielding, distant, a sovereign who had buried the woman he once knew beneath layers of imperial protocol. "The Coalition believes that without compromise, many worlds will have no choice but to seek alliances elsewhere," Kale pressed, "possibly with powers beyond the Outer Rim." A murmur rippled through the court. The implication was clear: rebellion, possibly backed by rival stellar empires. "Are you threatening the throne, Kale Raren?" asked a voice from beside the Empress. Counselor Vex, a man with a face like a blade and eyes that never seemed to blink. "I am delivering a message, as requested," Kale replied, keeping his gaze fixed on Lorena. "I have sworn to represent the Coalition's interests faithfully." "Interesting," said Vex, stepping closer to the throne. "How quickly your loyalties shifted after your departure from our court." There it was, the barb he had been expecting, the implication of betrayal. Kale had known it would come, but still, it stung. "My loyalty has always been to peace and justice throughout the Empire," Kyle responded evenly. "That has not changed." Lorena raised a hand, silencing Vex before he could reply. "The message has been received," she said. "The throne will consider the Coalition's concerns, but we will not be swayed by veiled threats." Kale bowed slightly. "Then I have fulfilled my obligation." He should have turned and left then. His mission, at least the official one, was complete. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Perhaps the weight of all that remained unsaid between them, or the memory of how things had once been. "Was there something else, Envoy?" Lorena asked, a hint of impatience coloring her tone. Yes, Kale said, before he could stop himself. There is something else. Something not from the coalition, but from me. The court grew utterly still. Even the guards seemed to tense, though they remained immobile. You sent me away 3 years ago, Kyle said, his voice lower now, meant for her despite the many ears listening. You ordered me to leave this very throne room, citing crimes against the Empire that we both know were fabricated. Silence, hissed Vex. This is not— Let him speak, Lorena commanded, her eyes never leaving Kale's face. Let us hear what the former envoy believes is so important that he would risk further offense to the throne. Kale stepped closer, close enough that the guards shifted slightly in warning. I have spent 3 years in exile, watching from the fringes as your empire begins to fracture. I have seen the fear on distant worlds, heard the whispers of rebellion, witnessed the corruption that has seeped into your council, while you remain isolated in this palace of glass and fire. You presume too much, Lorena said. But there was something in her voice now, a slight tremor, perhaps, or a note of uncertainty. I presume nothing, Kale replied. I know you, Lorena, better than anyone in this room. Better, perhaps, than you know yourself. And I know that the Empress who banished me is not the same woman who once stood beside me beneath the twin moons and spoke of a future where every world in the Empire thrived. The court was utterly silent now, many faces showing shock at this intimate address to their sovereign. Using her name without title was itself an offense punishable by imprisonment. Lorena's mask slipped, just for a moment, a flash of something vulnerable in her eyes before the imperial facade reasserted itself. You forget yourself. Kale Raren, she said, her voice hardening again. Whatever you believe you knew of me is in the past. I am Empress of Pyroterra and the 100 Worlds. My only concern is the stability and prosperity of the Empire. And how stable does your empire feel to you now? Kale asked. With rebellions brewing and your own council divided? How many nights do you lie awake, wondering which of your advisors speaks with a forked tongue? Vex stepped forward. This is treason, he snarled. Guards, remove this man. 2 of the armored figures moved from their positions, advancing toward Kale with mechanical precision. Wait, Lorena commanded. And the guards froze instantly. She rose from her throne, a slight woman made tall by her bearing and the power she wielded. Kale Raren, you have delivered your message. You have also spoken words that, from anyone else, would merit immediate execution. In memory of your previous service to the throne, I will show mercy. She descended the 3 steps of the dais until she stood on the same level as Kale, though still at a distance. You are ordered to leave this throne room, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. You are ordered to leave this planet by nightfall, and you are ordered never to return to my presence again. This is the will of the Empress. The finality in her voice struck Kale like a physical blow. He had come hoping, what? That she might listen? That she might remember what they had been to each other? That the woman he had loved might still exist somewhere beneath the crown? He bowed, a gesture that could be read as respectful or mocking. As you command, Empress. He straightened and met her gaze directly. Fine, but you'll miss me. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and a promise. Lorena's expression did not change, but Kale thought he saw something flicker in the depths of her eyes, a ripple in a frozen lake. She said nothing, her silence more devastating than any rebuke. Kale turned away, his back straight as he walked toward the great doors of the throne room. The courtiers parted before him, some looking scandalized, others curious, a few, the oldest among them with something like pity in their eyes. As the doors swung open, Kale paused and looked back over his shoulder. Lorena had returned to her throne, her profile sharp against the backdrop of molten light. Still, she said nothing. That silence would haunt him. That silence would drive him. And that silence, Kyle decided, as he stepped through the doors, would not be the last word between them. The corridors of the Imperial Palace were a maze of obsidian and precious metals, designed to disorient visitors and prevent any direct path to the Empress's chambers. But Kyle had once known these halls intimately, both as an official envoy and in stolen moments that no court record would ever acknowledge. He moved swiftly, ignoring the wary glances of palace staff and the occasional guard. His orders were to leave by nightfall. He still had hours before he would technically be in violation of the Empress's command. Instead of heading toward the main exit, Kale took a series of turns that led deeper into the palace's eastern wing. He needed information, and he knew exactly who might provide it. The archives were housed in a circular chamber whose walls were lined with data crystals glowing with soft blue light. In the center, bent over a holographic display, stood an elderly man with wispy white hair and spectacles that had gone out of fashion centuries ago. "Archivist Thelen," Kale said softly. The old man looked up, squinting, then smiled with genuine warmth. "Kale Raren, by the fire beneath us. Is that really you?" "In the flesh," Kale replied, stepping forward to clasp the archivist's thin hand. "Though, according to the throne, not for much longer." Thelen's smile faded. "I heard you were granted audience. It did not go well?" "Let's just say the reunion lacked a certain warmth." Kale glanced around to ensure they were alone. "I need information, Thelen. Something is wrong in the Empire. More wrong than a few trade disputes and border skirmishes." The archivist sighed and gestured for Kale to follow him to a more secluded corner of the archives. "I had hoped you might have returned with happier news," he said. "But I cannot say I'm surprised. Things have changed since your departure." "Tell me," Kale urged. Thelen's voice dropped to a whisper. "The Empress has withdrawn. She holds court, issues decrees, maintains all the formal functions of her office. But those of us who remember, we can see that something is amiss. She trusts almost no one. The Council has gained unprecedented power in daily governance." Councillor Vex seemed particularly comfortable speaking in her presence, Kyle observed. "Vex," Thelen practically spat the name. "He rose quickly after your exile. He and a faction within the Council. They move in shadows. Kyle, even I, with all my access to information, cannot track all their machinations." "And Lorena allows this?" The archivist looked troubled. I do not know if allows is the right word. There are rumors, whispers among the oldest servants. Some believe she is being manipulated, or perhaps even coerced." A cold anger began to build in Kale's chest. "Coerced? How?" "I cannot say for certain. But there was an incident, about a year after you left. The Empress fell ill, officially. It was announced as a minor ailment that required rest. But she disappeared from public view for nearly a month. When she returned," Thelen hesitated, "she was changed, more distant, more isolated, and Vex's faction grew bolder." Kale's mind raced. An illness that coincided with a shift in power dynamics was suspicious at best. "Poison? Perhaps," Thelen conceded. "Or something more insidious. There are technologies from the Outer Rim, mind-altering substances, neural implants." "Do you have proof of any of this?" Kyle interrupted. The archivist shook his head. "Only observations and correlations. Nothing that would stand as evidence." He paused, then reached into his robes and withdrew a small crystal, no larger than his thumbnail. "However, I have been collecting data, patterns of council meetings, changes in imperial policy, anomalies in the Empress's schedule. It is not proof, but it might lead you to some." Kale took the crystal, closing his fist around it. "Thank you, old friend. This is more than I dared hope for." "What will you do?" Thelen asked, concern etching deeper lines into his already wrinkled face. What I told her I would, Kyle said, a grim smile touching his lips. Make her miss me. The lower levels of Pyroterra's capital city were a stark contrast to the gleaming spires of the Imperial District. Here, the buildings were constructed of crude volcanic stone, the streets narrow and winding, the air thick with the scent of spices, machinery, and too many bodies in too little space. Kale had changed out of his formal attire into something less conspicuous, a simple gray tunic and pants, his leather jacket now concealing various tools and weapons that would have been confiscated at the palace gates. He blended with the crowds of workers returning from their shifts in the geothermal plants that powered the city. Ember's Rest was a tavern known for its potent drinks and discreet alcoves where conversations could remain private. It was also known as a gathering place for those whose loyalties to the throne might be considered flexible. Kale pushed through the door, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior, lit mainly by the glow of actual flames in iron braziers. The clientele was diverse, off-duty laborers, minor officials slumming in the Undercity, spacers between jobs, and a few figures whose occupations were best left unexamined. He made his way to the bar, where a hulking figure with skin like weathered basalt was pouring drinks with surprising delicacy. Kale Rarin, rumbled the bartender, a Parisian whose volcanic homeworld had given his species their distinctive appearance. Thought you were banned from this rock. Technically, I'm banned from the palace, Kale corrected, sliding onto a stool. I've got until sundown before I'm violating any imperial decrees. The Parisian, Borgin, if Kale remembered correctly, grunted. Cutting it close, aren't you? Sun's already touching the western peaks. I need to see Yora, Kale said, ignoring the warning. Is she here? Borgin's expression was difficult to read through the craggy features, but his hesitation was clear. Jorah's been keeping a low profile lately. Imperial enforcers have been sniffing around. It's important, Kale insisted. Tell her it's about old times. The bartender studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. Wait here, and try not to draw attention. He moved away, disappearing through a door behind the bar. Kale kept his back to the wall, sipping the drink Borgin had left for him, a local spirit that burned going down and left a taste like charred fruit in its wake. His eyes scanned the room, noting exits, potential threats, and the general mood of the establishment. He was midway through his drink when a shadow fell across his table. Well, said a familiar voice, smooth as silk but with an edge like a sharpened blade. The prodigal returns. Jorah Ven slid into the seat opposite him, a woman whose age was impossible to determine. Her skin was a deep bronze, her hair a cascade of tight silver curls despite her youthful features. She wore the practical attire of an undercity mechanic, but the numerous rings on her fingers and the quality of the fabric suggested her true profession was considerably more lucrative. Hello, Yora, Kyle said, allowing himself a genuine smile. You look well. Can't say the same for you, she replied, though the corner of her mouth quirked upward. Exile doesn't seem to agree with you. You've got new lines around your eyes. Experience, not age, Kale quipped. Is that what we're calling heartbreak these days? Jorah raised an eyebrow. Borgin says you mentioned old times. I assume this isn't a social call. Kale leaned forward, lowering his voice. I need information about the Imperial Council, specifically Councillor Vex and his associates. Jorah's expression grew serious. Dangerous territory. Kyle, Vex has eyes and ears everywhere these days, even down here. That's part of what concerns me, Kale said. Since when does an Imperial Councillor have influence in the Undercity? Since about 2 years ago, Jorah replied. Started subtle, bribes to local enforcers, pressure on business owners. Then came the security contractors, thugs with official sanction to keep the peace. Now there's hardly a deal goes down that Vex's people don't get a cut of. And the Empress allows this? Jorah gave him a pitying look. The Empress is distant. Pronouncements come from the palace. But the hand behind them. Many think it's Vex and his faction. She studied Cale's face. You still care for her, don't you? Even after she cast you out. Cale didn't answer directly. Something's wrong. Jorah, Lorena may have exiled me, but what I'm hearing doesn't sound like her. The trade restrictions, the increased security presence, the concentration of power in the council. It's as if someone is deliberately trying to incite rebellion. Maybe they are, Jorah said quietly. War can be profitable for those in the right positions. A chill ran through Cale. What have you heard? Jorah glanced around, then reached into her pocket and activated a small device. A subtle hum indicated a privacy field had been established around their table. Rumors, mostly, she said, but consistent ones. Weapons shipments redirected from Imperial armories to private stockpiles. Communications equipment being installed in remote locations. And there's a new compound being built in the Ashen Wastes. Officially a research facility. But my sources say it looks more like a fortress. Whose fortress? Cale asked. That's the interesting part, Jorah replied. The funding comes through a series of shell corporations. But if you trace them back far enough, they all connect to members of Vex's inner circle. Cale sat back, processing this information. They're preparing for something. A coup, most likely, Jorah confirmed. The question is whether they plan to depose Lorena entirely, or merely continue to use her as a figurehead. I need proof, Cale said. Something concrete I can take to people who might still be loyal to her. Jorah hesitated, then nodded. There's someone who might be able to help. A technomancer named Cyrix. He specializes in data retrieval and encryption breaking. If anyone can get you inside Vex's communications, it's him. Can you arrange a meeting? I can point you in the right direction, Jorah said cautiously. But Cyrix is particular about who he works with, and he doesn't come cheap. Cale reached into his jacket and pulled out a small pouch, sliding it across the table. Will this cover an introduction? Jorah peeked inside, her eyebrows rising slightly at the collection of rare earth crystals, currency that was valuable throughout the Empire and beyond. This will get you more than an introduction. This will get you his undivided attention. She pocketed the pouch. He operates from a forge in the Smelters District. I'll send the exact location to your comm. Thank you, Jorah. She deactivated the privacy field, but made no move to leave. Kyle, she said, her voice softer now. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Vex doesn't just remove obstacles. He makes examples of them. I'll keep that in mind. See that you do. She stood, then hesitated. For what it's worth, I never believed the charges against you. Neither did most people down here who knew your work. Cale felt a surge of gratitude. That means a lot. Jorah nodded. Then leaned down and spoke directly into his ear. Leave now. Northern exit. 3 Imperial enforcers just came in the main door, and they're scanning faces. Without waiting for his response, she straightened and sauntered toward the bar, calling out a greeting to Borgen, as if their conversation had been nothing more than casual catching up. Cale didn't look toward the main entrance. Instead, he calmly finished his drink, left payment on the table, and made his way toward a narrow corridor at the back of the tavern that would lead to the northern exit Jorah had mentioned. He was almost there when a voice called out, "Halt! Imperial enforcement!" Cale broke into a run. The northern exit of Ember's Rest opened onto a service alley used for deliveries and waste disposal. Cale burst through the door and immediately veered left, away from the main street where the enforcers would have stationed backup. The alley was narrow and poorly lit, with steam venting from pipes that ran along the buildings. Cale used the cover of the vapor clouds, moving swiftly but deliberately, listening for pursuit. It didn't take long. Heavy footsteps and the crackle of communication devices told him at least two enforcers were following. A quick glance back confirmed his suspicion. Standard Imperial enforcers, in their black and red uniforms, armed with shock batons and neural disruptors. "Kael Raren," one called out. "By order of the Imperial Council, you are commanded to surrender yourself for questioning." Kael had no intention of finding out what kind of questioning Vex's enforcers had in mind. He picked up his pace, taking a sharp right turn into an even narrower passage between buildings. This part of the Undercity was a labyrinth he had explored thoroughly during his years as an envoy. When he'd made it his business to understand all levels of Pirateran society, the enforcers, likely recruited from other worlds or the upper city, would be at a disadvantage. He came to a junction and chose the path that sloped downward, leading toward one of the many maintenance tunnels that honeycombed the city's foundation. The deeper he went, the closer he would be to the natural lava flows that powered everything on Piraterra. The air grew warmer, the light taking on an orange-red glow from the magma channels, visible through reinforced glass sections of the tunnel floor. Sweat beaded on Kael's forehead, but he pressed on, listening as the sounds of pursuit grew more distant. He had nearly reached a maintenance hatch that would lead to a different section of the Undercity when a new sound stopped him: the distinctive whine of a hover drone. Imperial enforcement had deployed aerial surveillance. Kael cursed under his breath. The drones were equipped with thermal imaging, which would make him easy to track against the cooler tunnel walls, despite the ambient heat from the lava flows. He needed to disappear completely. Making a split-second decision, Kael backtracked to a section of the tunnel where the glass floor panels were hinged for access to the magma channels below. These channels were used by maintenance workers in temperature-regulated suits to adjust the flow regulators that prevented the city from being consumed by the very power source it relied upon. Kael knelt and quickly entered an override code into the access panel, a code that should have been changed after his exile, but, if Thelen's assessment of the palace's administrative decline was accurate, might have been overlooked. The panel blinked green. The floor section unlocked with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Kael lifted the panel and was immediately hit with a wave of intense heat. Below, just a few meters down, flowed a river of molten rock, its surface a glowing, shifting pattern of orange, red, and black. Maintenance platforms extended out over the flow, narrow walkways designed for workers in protective gear. He could hear the hover drone approaching, its sensors, no doubt already detecting his heat signature. Making his decision, Kael lowered himself onto the nearest platform, which was barely wide enough for a person to stand. The heat was nearly unbearable, even at this distance from the magma. Reaching up, he pulled the floor panel closed above him, sealing himself in the channel. Now came the dangerous part. The platform he stood on was connected to a series of similar platforms that zigzagged across the magma flow, leading to a maintenance exit on the far side. If he could cross before the heat overcame him, he could emerge in a completely different section of the Undercity. Kael began to move, each step deliberate on the narrow metal pathway. The air scorched his lungs, and he pulled the collar of his jacket up to cover his mouth and nose, providing minimal protection. His eyes watered from the heat and gases rising from the magma. Halfway across, he heard a mechanical sound above. The drone had tracked him to this section and was hovering over the access panel. Would its sensors be able to detect him through the insulated floor section? He couldn't risk assuming they wouldn't. Kael quickened his pace, ignoring the way the metal pathway seemed to shimmer in the extreme heat. His boots, designed for various harsh environments, were beginning to smolder at the edges. 3/4 of the way across, disaster struck. The drone must have alerted human operators to his probable location, because the access panel at the far end of the channel opened, revealing an enforcer in a partial heat suit, enough protection for a brief exposure to the channel's conditions. "Raren!" the enforcer shouted, the sound distorted by his breathing apparatus. "There's nowhere to go! Surrender now!" Kale was trapped between the Enforcer ahead and the drone monitoring the access point behind him. The only other direction was down, into certain death in the magma flow. Or was it? During his time as an envoy, Kale had made it a point to understand not just the political structures of Piraterra, but its physical ones as well. He knew that these magma channels weren't just for power generation. They were also part of a complex system to prevent pressure buildup from the planet's volcanic activity. And where there was pressure regulation, there were emergency vents. Kale changed direction, moving laterally along a connecting platform that ran parallel to the magma flow. The Enforcer, seeing his movement, began to advance cautiously along the main pathway. "Last warning, Raren!" Kale reached what he was looking for. A control panel mounted on the wall of the channel, partially protected from the heat by a reflective shield. The emergency venting system, designed to redirect magma flow in case of dangerous pressure buildup. He had seconds at most before the Enforcer reached him. With fingers already blistering from the heat, Kale punched in a sequence of commands. A warning klaxon sounded, echoing through the channel. Red lights began to flash along the walls. "What have you done?" the Enforcer shouted, faltering as the warning system activated. Kale didn't answer. Instead, he gripped a maintenance ladder mounted to the wall and began to climb upward, toward a secondary access point he knew existed for emergency evacuations. Below, a series of heavy metal barriers began to rise from beneath the magma, redirecting the flow away from this section of the channel and toward a cooling chamber designed to handle excess pressure. The Enforcer, realizing the danger, retreated back toward his entry point. Kale reached the emergency hatch and spun the manual release wheel. It resisted, likely from lack of use, but desperation gave him strength. With a groaning sound, the hatch opened, and Kale pulled himself through into a narrow vertical shaft fitted with ladder rungs. He sealed the hatch behind him just as the venting system reached full activation. Even through the thick metal, he could hear the roar of diverted magma and the furious shouts of the Enforcer. Kale began to climb, his hands painful but functional. The shaft would lead to a maintenance room in a different district entirely, far from the Enforcers who had pursued him from Ember's Rest. As he climbed, his thoughts returned to the palace, to Lorena sitting silent on her throne. Had she already heard of his escape? Did she know what her counselors were planning? Was she truly complicit? Or was she, as Thelen suggested, somehow compromised? Most importantly, when he had said she would miss him, had any part of her believed it might be true? The Smelters District was aptly named, a sprawling industrial zone where the unique properties of Piraterra's volcanic metals were harnessed to create alloys found nowhere else in the Empire. The air was thick with metallic dust, and the constant rhythm of hammers and presses created a backdrop of industrial music. Kale moved cautiously through the district, his face partially covered by a filtration mask common among the workers here. His encounter with the Enforcers had confirmed what he already suspected. Vex was monitoring communications, likely had access to the city's surveillance systems, and had specifically targeted Kale for apprehension. This wasn't merely about enforcing his exile. They feared what he might discover. The coordinates Jorah had sent led to a small forge set apart from the larger operations, nestled in the shadow of a massive cooling tower. Unlike the industrial forges with their teams of workers, this one appeared to be a private operation. A simple sign hung above the door, Cyrix Metallurgical Solutions. Kale approached the entrance, noting the sophisticated security scanner disguised as a weather shield above the door. He knocked firmly. After a moment, the door slid open a crack, revealing a single cybernetic eye that glowed with a pale blue light. "State your business," came a voice, surprisingly melodic for its mechanical timbre. "Jorah Ven sent me," Kale replied. "I'm looking for Cyrix." The eye scanned him from head to toe. Thermal signature indicates recent exposure to extreme heat. Facial recognition matches Kyle Raren, former Imperial envoy, currently subject to an enforcement alert. Probability of surveillance, 67%. Can we continue this conversation inside? Kale asked, glancing over his shoulder at the busy street. The door opened wider, revealing a figure that was as much machine as human. Cyrix appeared to be of average height, but it was difficult to tell where the person ended and the technology began. Their right arm was entirely mechanical, as was much of the right side of their face. Various implants and augmentations were visible at the joints, and along what exposed skin remained. "Enter," Cyrix said. "Quickly!" Kale stepped inside, and the door sealed behind him with a series of clicks that suggested multiple locking mechanisms. The interior of the forge was nothing like Kale had expected. While there was indeed a small smelting area visible through a doorway, the main space was dominated by data terminals, holographic projectors, and what appeared to be a custom-built quantum computer humming quietly in the corner. "Jorah informed me you might come," Cyrix said, moving to one of the terminals with a graceful efficiency that belied their mechanical components. "She did not specify the nature of your need, only that it involved sensitive data extraction." "That's correct," Kale confirmed. "I need to access communications within the Imperial Council, specifically those of Councillor Vex and his associates." Cyrix's human eye widened slightly, while the cybernetic one adjusted its aperture. "You do not request simple tasks, former envoy." "I can pay," Kyle said, reaching for another pouch of earth crystals. Cyrix waved the mechanical hand dismissively. "Currency is not my primary concern. Information, however." They tilted their head, studying Kale. "Why do you seek this data? Revenge for your exile?" "No," Kyle said firmly. "Protection for the Empire. I have reason to believe Vex and his faction are planning a coup against Empress Lorena." Cyrix was silent for a moment, their cybernetic components whirring softly, as if processing this information. "Interesting. My own data analysis has detected anomalies in official communications over the past 18 months. Patterns consistent with clandestine operations." "You've been monitoring Imperial communications?" Kyle asked, surprised. "I monitor all communications," Cyrix replied matter-of-factly. "Knowledge is survival in my profession." Kale decided not to question the legality of this. "Then you already have access to what I need." "Partial access," Cyrix corrected. "The Imperial Council uses quantum encrypted channels for their most sensitive communications. Breaking those encryptions requires specialized equipment and significant processing power." They gestured to the quantum computer. "I have been working on the problem, for my own purposes." "And those purposes would be?" Cyrix's human features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile. "Let us say that Councillor Vex's expansion into the Undercity has made operating my business more complicated. His security contractors demanded tribute. I declined. They attempted enforcement. 3 of them still require medical care." Despite the situation, Kale found himself liking the technomancer. "So we have a common enemy." "Perhaps." Cyrix moved to a holographic display and activated it, bringing up a complex web of connections and data flows. This represents the communication network of the Imperial Palace. The bright nodes are access points I have already compromised. The dark ones remain secure. Kale studied the display. "Vex's communications would be here?" He pointed to a heavily secured node. "Correct. However, direct access would trigger security protocols. A more subtle approach is required." Cyrix manipulated the display, zooming in on a different section. "The Empress's private communication system is separate from the Council's, but there are bridge points where they must interface for official business. Can you access those bridge points?" "With the right authentication codes, yes. Which brings me to what I require from you." Cyrix turned to face Kale directly. "You were once close to the Empress. You would have had access to her private systems." Kale tensed. "Those codes would have been changed after my exile." "Perhaps," Cyrix acknowledged. But authentication systems often retain historical data for verification purposes. If you can provide your old access codes, I may be able to use them to create a ghost protocol that mimics authorized access. The request made Kale uncomfortable. Even in exile, he had maintained certain principles about Lorena's privacy and security. I'm not trying to spy on the Empress. My concern is Vex and his faction. I understand your reluctance, Cyrix said. But consider, if Vex is indeed planning a coup, he must be communicating with the Empress in some capacity, maintaining the illusion of loyal service. Those communications would be invaluable evidence. Kale couldn't argue with the logic, though it still felt like a betrayal. If I help you access these systems, I need your word that we only target Vex's faction. Anything related solely to the Empress remains private. Cyrix inclined their head. Acceptable terms. They extended their mechanical hand. Do we have an agreement? After a moment's hesitation, Kale clasped the offered hand. We do. Excellent. Cyrix returned to the terminal. Now, I require your historical authentication codes and any details you can recall about the palace's internal security protocols. For the next hour, Kale provided everything he could remember about the palace's communication systems, security measures, and his own access credentials. Cyrix worked with remarkable efficiency, their cybernetic components occasionally connecting directly to the terminals through fine filament cables that extended from their fingertips. Fascinating, the technomancer murmured at one point. Your access was never fully revoked, merely suspended. An unusual oversight in Imperial security. What does that mean? Kale asked. It means, Cyrix said, their mechanical eye glowing brighter, that, with some adjustments, we may be able to restore partial access rather than creating a ghost protocol. Less detectable, more stable. As they worked, Kale found himself reflecting on Cyrix's observation. His access had never been fully revoked. Was it truly an oversight? Or had Lorena, despite her public condemnation, left a door slightly ajar? I have established a secure pathway, Cyrix announced eventually. We can now monitor communications passing between Vex's faction and the Empress's office. However, accessing historical data will require more time. How much time? Several hours at minimum. The encryption is formidable. Kale checked the time. The sun would have set by now. He was officially in violation of the Empress's order to leave the planet. I may not have several hours. Enforcement will be looking for me with increasing urgency. Cyrix considered this. I can continue the data extraction while you take other necessary actions. Return when you can, and I will have information for you. It was a reasonable suggestion, but Kyle was reluctant to leave without any concrete evidence. Is there anything you can give me now? Something I can use if I need leverage? The technomancer was silent for a moment. Then, moved to a different terminal. There is one communication I intercepted 3 days ago. It was transmitted from a location in the Ashen Wastes to Counselor Vex's private channel. The encryption was unusual, not Imperial standard, which is why it caught my attention. Cyrix's fingers moved over the interface, and a holographic document appeared. I have only partially decrypted it, but the content is concerning. Kale leaned forward to read the floating text. Partial decryption. Preparations at 87% completion. Security forces in position. Operation Regicide can commence as scheduled on the day of ascension. The Empress will encrypted section, and control will transfer to the Council without disruption. Public announcement of her encrypted section has been prepared. All necessary encrypted section are in place. Awaiting final authorization. End partial decryption. The day of ascension, Kale said, his blood running cold. That's 3 days from now. The anniversary of Lorena's coronation. A symbolically appropriate time for a coup, Cyrix observed. Though the encrypted sections leave much to speculation. Kale stared at the document, particularly at the code name. Operation Regicide. They're not just planning to control her as a figurehead. They intend to kill her. The evidence is circumstantial, Cyrix cautioned, but the probability is high. A new urgency gripped Kale. I need a copy of this. Of course. Cyrix transferred the data to a secure crystal and handed it to Kale. I will continue working on the full decryption and extraction of related communications. Return when you can do so safely. Kale pocketed the crystal. Thank you, Cyrix. Your help may save the Empire. The technomancer's expression was unreadable, a mix of human emotion and mechanical impassivity. I care little for the Empire as a concept, Kale Raren, but I have observed the Empress's governance closely. Whatever her flaws, she has maintained a balance that allows people like me to exist with minimal interference. I doubt Vex's regime would be so accommodating to those who differ from his vision of order. A pragmatic view, Kale acknowledged, but an accurate one. One more thing before you go. Cyrix moved to a storage unit and retrieved what appeared to be a small metallic disc. A personal shield generator, modified to mask your thermal signature. It will help you avoid detection by enforcement drones. Kale accepted the device gratefully. I can't pay you enough for all this. Consider it an investment in a future where I can continue my work undisturbed, Cyrix replied. And perhaps, when this is resolved, you might remember that not all technological innovations require imperial approval to be beneficial. I'll remember, Kale promised, attaching the shield generator to his belt. As he prepared to leave, a sudden alarm blared from one of Cyrix's monitoring stations. The technomancer moved swiftly to the display, their mechanical components whirring with increased activity. Imperial Enforcers, they announced. A full tactical unit, approaching from the main thoroughfare. Their deployment pattern suggests they know you are in this district. Kale tensed. Is there another way out? Yes, but you cannot outrun a full tactical unit indefinitely. Cyrix made a decision. I will create a diversion. When the enforcers are distracted, use the maintenance tunnel behind the smelting room. It connects to the old mining network beneath the district. A diversion could put you at risk, Kale objected. Cyrix's mechanical eye gleamed. I have survived far worse than Imperial attention. Kale Raren. Besides, they have no evidence of my involvement with you. I am merely a registered metallurgist with some unusual augmentations. Before Kale could argue further, Cyrix moved to a control panel and activated a sequence of commands. Outside, a series of explosions erupted from nearby industrial equipment, followed by the hiss of escaping steam and the wail of emergency sirens. Industrial accident, the technomancer explained calmly. Tragic, but not uncommon in this district. The enforcers will be required to assist with containment before continuing their search. Kale had to admire the efficiency of it. How will I find my way through the mining network? Cyrix handed him a small device. This will project a map and guide you to an exit in the financial district. From there, you must determine your own path. And where should I go? Kale asked. The spaceport will be watched. Consider what you now know, Cyrix said. Where would you be most effective with this information? The answer was obvious, though it carried the greatest risk. The palace. Indeed. Cyrix moved to the door of the smelting room. The diversion will not last long. You should go now. Kale nodded, then paused. Cyrix, thank you. The technomancer's human features formed something approximating a smile. Save your gratitude for after you have succeeded, Kale Raren, and remember your promise about the Empress's private communications. I will, Kyle assured them. Then, hurried through the doorway into the smelting room and toward the maintenance tunnel beyond. Behind him, he could hear the chaos of the industrial accident and the shouted commands of Imperial enforcers trying to establish order. Cyrix had bought him time, but how he used it would determine not just his fate, but potentially that of Lorena and the Empire itself. The old mining tunnels beneath the smelters district were a maze of narrow passages, some barely wide enough for Kale to squeeze through. The air was thick with dust and the lingering scent of minerals, and the only light came from the small guidance device Cyrix had provided. Kale moved as quickly as he dared, following the holographic map projected before him. Occasionally, he would hear distant sounds of pursuit. The enforcers hadn't been entirely fooled by Cyrix's diversion, but the tunnels offered too many possible routes for them to effectively track him. After what felt like hours but was likely less than one, the tunnel began to slope upward. The map indicated he was approaching an exit point in the financial district, a section of the capital dominated by banks, trading houses, and the offices of corporations that managed Pyroterra's considerable mineral wealth. The exit, when he reached it, was disguised as a maintenance access in the basement of what appeared to be a bank vault. Kale emerged cautiously, activating the shield generator Cyrix had given him. A subtle vibration against his skin told him it was functioning, masking his heat signature from any nearby surveillance. The financial district was quieter at night than the perpetually active smelters district, but not deserted. Security personnel patrolled regularly, and late-working executives occasionally emerged from gleaming buildings. Kyle adjusted his appearance as best he could, straightening his clothes and adopting the confident stride of someone with legitimate business. His destination was clear in his mind: the palace. But direct approach would be suicide. He needed a way in that wouldn't immediately trigger alarms, and he needed allies once inside. Captain Arkin of the Imperial Guard might be such an ally. Unlike the enforcers who answered to the Council, the Imperial Guard's loyalty was traditionally to the throne itself. Arkin was a career soldier who had served under Lorena's father before her ascension. He and Kale had never been close. Arkin had viewed Kale's influence over the Empress with thinly veiled suspicion. But the captain's dedication to the Imperial line was unquestionable. The challenge would be contacting him without alerting Vex's faction. Kale made his way to a public communication terminal in a quiet corner of the district. These terminals were primarily used by citizens without personal devices, often those from the lower city seeking to communicate with relatives in orbital habitats or outlying settlements. They were basic, with limited functionality, but they were also less likely to be monitored than more sophisticated systems. He inserted a small payment chip and accessed the messaging function. Direct communication with the palace was restricted, but Kyle knew that certain ceremonial messages, congratulations on imperial holidays, formal petitions, and the like, were routed through a separate system designed to handle high volumes. Kale composed a message that, on the surface, appeared to be a formal request for a pilgrimage blessing, a common practice among devout citizens during the Ascension celebrations. To the Office of Imperial Ceremonies, I humbly request a blessing for my family's pilgrimage to the sacred pools during the Ascension celebrations. We will approach via the Western Gate at midnight tonight, as tradition dictates for those traveling from distant regions. May the Empress's light guide our path, a loyal subject. To most readers, it would appear to be a routine request, perhaps notable only for its late submission. But Kyle knew that the mention of the Western Gate, which had been sealed for renovations for over a year, combined with the midnight timing, would flag the message for security review. More importantly, Sacred Pools was a code phrase used during Kale's time at court for urgent, off-the-record communications with the Imperial Guard. If Arkin received this message, he would understand that someone with insider knowledge was requesting a clandestine meeting. Kale sent the message, then immediately left the terminal. He had no way of knowing if it would reach Arkan or if the captain would respond even if it did. But it was the best option available. With hours to kill before midnight, Kale needed a place to rest and plan. The shield generator would mask him from thermal scans, but it wouldn't make him invisible to conventional surveillance or human observers. He needed somewhere with minimal security presence but sufficient crowd cover to blend in. The night market in the Merchants' Quarter fit those requirements. Open from dusk until dawn, it catered to shift workers, insomniacs, and travelers adjusted to off-world time cycles. Its narrow, winding aisles were crowded with stalls, selling everything from fresh produce to counterfeit luxury goods, creating a chaotic environment perfect for someone wanting to disappear. Kale made his way there, moving through side streets and using public transportation where possible to avoid attracting attention. By the time he reached the market, full night had fallen over the capital, and the streets were illuminated by the distinctive red-orange glow that came from light filtered through the city's volcanic glass architecture. The market was a riot of colors, sounds, and smells. Vendors called out their wares in multiple languages. Cooking fires sent aromatic smoke into the air, and the crowd was a diverse mix of Pirateran natives and off-worlders from throughout the empire. Kale purchased a bowl of spiced noodles from a food stall and found a seat at a communal table where he could observe without being obvious. As he ate, he considered his next steps. If Arkan received the message and was willing to meet, Kale would have a potential ally with access to the palace. If not, he would need to find another way in, perhaps through the service tunnels, though they would be heavily guarded during the Ascension celebrations. Once inside, his priority would be reaching Lorena directly, bypassing Vex and his faction. The partial decryption Cyrix had provided suggested they planned to make their move during the Ascension ceremony itself, which meant Kale had less than 3 days to prevent it. He was so deep in thought that he almost missed the subtle vibration from the communicator in his pocket. Carefully, keeping his movements casual, he checked the device. A single message, anonymous, routed through multiple proxy servers. The Pilgrim. The western path is indeed closed for renovations. The gardener's entrance, however, remains accessible to those who remember the proper greeting. The midnight hour is acceptable. Kale felt a surge of hope. The gardener's entrance was a small gate in the palace's outer wall, primarily used by the staff who maintained the extensive imperial gardens. More importantly, the proper greeting was a reference to the authentication codes used by the Imperial Guard. Arkan had received the message and was offering a way in. Now, Kale just had to reach the gardener's entrance without being captured by Vex's enforcers, convince Arkan of the imminent threat, and somehow gain access to Lorena herself, all while being a condemned exile under an Imperial removal order. Simple. As midnight approached, Kyle made his way toward the Imperial District, staying within the shadows of the ornate buildings that surrounded the palace grounds. The Ascension celebrations had already begun in a limited capacity, with ceremonial lights illuminating the palace spires and occasional fireworks bursting overhead. The gardener's entrance was located in a relatively secluded section of the outer wall, partially obscured by ornamental trees and accessible via a narrow service road. As Kale approached, he noted with approval that the area appeared deserted. Arkan had ensured no regular patrols would interrupt their meeting. The gate itself was modest, a simple arch of polished stone with ironwood doors, reinforced with volcanic steel. A single light illuminated the entrance, casting long shadows across the path. Kale paused in the darkness beyond the light's reach, scanning for any sign of a trap. Nothing seemed amiss, but caution had kept him alive this long. He activated a small device from his pocket, another gift from Cyrix, a scanner designed to detect electronic surveillance. The device remained silent. If there were watchers, they were human, not technological. Taking a deep breath, Kale stepped into the light. Almost immediately, the ironwood doors opened slightly, and a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, clad in the distinctive armor of the Imperial Guard. Captain Arkan's face was weathered, his dark hair now streaked with gray at the temples, but his bearing, was as commanding as ever. "The pilgrim arrives," Arkin said formally, his voice low. "Seeking the Empress's light," Kale replied, completing the authentication phrase. Arkin studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a short nod, he stepped aside. Inside, quickly, Kale entered, and Arkin secured the door behind them. They were in a small anteroom, sparsely furnished with a bench and storage lockers for the gardener's equipment. "I assumed you were dead," Arkin said without preamble. "Or at least wise enough to have left the Empire entirely." "Good to see you too, Captain," Kale replied dryly. "This is no joke. Raren, do you know how many enforcement units are searching for you? Councillor Vex himself issued the order for your immediate apprehension." "I am aware," Kale said. "That's partly why I'm here. Vex and his faction are planning a coup. Arcan. They intend to kill the Empress during the Ascension ceremony." Arkin's expression shifted from stern to alarmed, then quickly to skeptical. "That's a serious accusation. What proof do you have?" Kale produced the data crystal Cyrix had given him. "Intercepted communications. A partially decrypted message referring to Operation Regicide, scheduled for the day of Ascension." Arkin took the crystal, but made no move to review its contents. "And I'm supposed to accept this as evidence? For all I know, this could be rebel propaganda designed to create confusion during our most important ceremony." "You know me, Arkin," Kale said intently. "Whatever you thought of my relationship with the Empress, you know I would never do anything to put her in danger." The captain's jaw tightened. "I know you were exiled for reasons fabricated by the very people now planning to seize power," Kale countered. "Think, Arkin. Have you noticed changes in the Empress since my departure? Has she become more isolated, more dependent on the Council for decision-making?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Arkin's face. "The burden of rule is heavy. It changes people." "Or someone is changing her," Kale pressed. "Felon mentioned an illness, about a year after I left. Did you notice any difference in her after that?" "The archivist should learn to guard his tongue," Arkin muttered, but his expression had grown troubled. "Yes, there was an illness. Severe, though the public was told otherwise. She was not the same afterward. More distant, even from those of us who have served her family for generations." "That's not coincidence," Kyle said. "Vex and his people have been manipulating her, possibly using some form of mind-altering substance or technology. And now they're ready to complete their takeover." Arkin was silent for a long moment, weighing Kale's words against his own observations. Finally, he slipped the data crystal into a secure pocket of his armor. "I will review this evidence," he said. "And I will increase security around the Empress during the Ascension ceremonies. But I cannot simply arrest members of the Imperial Council based on intercepted messages and speculation." "Then let me speak to her," Kale urged. "Directly, without Vex or his people present." Arkin shook his head firmly. "Impossible. The Empress has explicitly ordered that you are to be denied entry to the palace. I'm already violating protocol by not arresting you immediately." "Then why did you agree to meet me?" Kale challenged. The captain's expression softened slightly. "Because despite our differences, I never believed you were a traitor. Your methods were unorthodox, and your influence over the Empress concerned me. But your loyalty to her was never in question." It was as close to an admission of trust as Kale was likely to get from the stern captain. "Then help me now. There must be a way I can reach her without being seen." Arkin considered this, clearly torn between duty and the growing suspicion that Kale might be right. "The Ascension preparations have created certain vulnerabilities in our security protocols. Staff are working around the clock. Deliveries are constant. Guests are arriving from throughout the Empire." "Meaning?" "Meaning that with the right disguise and credentials, One might move about certain areas of the palace without attracting undue attention. Arkin reached into a locker and withdrew a bundle of fabric. Service uniforms for the Ascension banquet staff. And this, he produced an identification badge. Will grant access to the preparation areas and service corridors adjacent to the main ceremonial halls. Kale took the items, a spark of hope igniting. Thank you, Arkin. I haven't decided if I'm helping you or setting a trap, the captain admitted. But if there's even a chance the Empress is in danger, I cannot ignore it. He fixed Kale with a stern look. But understand this. If you make any move that threatens her safety, or if this turns out to be some elaborate deception, I will kill you myself. I would expect nothing less, Kale replied solemnly. Arkan nodded, satisfied. The badge will get you into the service areas. Beyond that, you're on your own. The Empress's private chambers are heavily guarded, as are all ceremonial spaces where she will appear tomorrow. I'll find a way, Kale said, already changing into the service uniform. It was slightly too large, but not noticeably so. The badge, when clipped to his chest, looked perfectly ordinary, the kind worn by hundreds of temporary staff brought in for the celebrations. One more thing, Arkin said, as Kyle prepared to leave the anteroom for the main palace grounds. The Empress, after your exile, she was different, not just in matters of state, but personally. Whatever passed between you, I believe she regretted how it ended. The admission clearly cost the proud captain something to make. Kale nodded, touched by the unexpected insight. All the more reason to ensure she survives to make her own decisions again. Indeed. Arkin opened a different door, one that led to a service path running along the inside of the palace wall. This will take you to the kitchen preparation areas. From there, you can access most of the palace's service corridors. Kale stepped through, then turned back. If I'm right about this, Arkin, we'll need to move quickly once I have proof. Will the Imperial Guard stand with the Empress against the Council if necessary? The Guard's loyalty is to the throne, Arkin said firmly. Always. With that reassurance, Kale moved deeper into the palace grounds. A servant among servants, invisible in his ordinariness, yet carrying the fate of an empire in his hands. The kitchen preparation areas were chaos incarnate. Dozens of chefs and their assistants worked at a frantic pace, preparing elaborate dishes for the Ascension banquet that would follow tomorrow's ceremony. Servers rushed back and forth, carrying trays of sample dishes for final approval, while supervisors shouted orders that echoed off the high ceilings. No one gave Kale a second glance as he moved through the space, his service badge clearly visible. He picked up a tray of empty glasses, giving himself a prop and a reason to be moving through the corridors. The palace was a hive of activity even at this late hour. Decorators hung ceremonial banners in the hallways, technicians adjusted lighting systems, and security personnel conducted routine checks of public areas. The atmosphere was one of anticipation and nervous energy, perfect cover for someone who wished to remain unnoticed. Kale navigated the service corridors with practiced ease, his years at court having given him an intimate knowledge of the palace's layout. His immediate goal was to reach the communication hub that served the Imperial Council's offices. If he could access their secure network, he might find more concrete evidence of their plans. The hub was located in a restricted area, but service staff were permitted limited access to maintain the physical infrastructure. Kale's badge would get him in the door. What happened after that would depend on his wits and whatever security measures were in place. As he approached the communications sector, he noticed an increased security presence. Guards stationed at intersections, identity checks being performed more frequently. Vex's influence, no doubt, tightening control as the coup approached. Kale adjusted his route, taking a longer path through less traveled corridors. Eventually, he reached a maintenance access that would lead him to the hub's primary server room. He swiped his badge at the reader, holding his breath. The light flashed green, access granted. The server room was dimly lit and humming with the sound of cooling systems. Rows of data processing units lined the walls, their status lights blinking in hypnotic patterns. A single technician sat at a monitoring station, his back to the door. Kale set his tray down silently and approached. "System check," he said, adopting the bored tone of routine maintenance staff. "Need to verify the ceremonial announcement channels." The technician glanced up, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Scheduling says that's not until morning." "Schedule changed," Kale replied with a shrug. "Counselor's orders. You know how it is before Ascension. Everyone wants everything done immediately." The technician sighed. "Tell me about it. I've been here 16 hours already." He stood, stretching. "Go ahead. I could use a break anyway." As the man moved toward the door, Kale added casually, "Oh, and the mess hall just put out fresh pastries for the night shift. Better hurry before they're gone." That sealed it. The technician's pace quickened, and he was out the door without a backward glance. Alone in the server room, Kale moved swiftly to the monitoring station. The technician had left his session active, a serious security breach, but a fortunate one for Kale. He inserted Cyrix's data crystal into the terminal, activating the specialized program the Technomancer had included. The program went to work immediately, bypassing security protocols and searching for communications matching specific parameters, Vex's authorization codes, references to Operation Regicide, and any mentions of the Ascension ceremony. While it ran, Kale accessed the technician's authorized view of the palace security system. From here, he could see the deployment of guards throughout the public areas, the status of various security checkpoints, and the scheduled movements of key personnel for the ceremony. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Security around the Empress had been subtly weakened, gaps in patrol routes, reassignment of veteran guards to peripheral duties, unusual access granted to Council security personnel rather than the Imperial Guard. The data crystal chimed softly, indicating it had found something. Kale opened the results and found himself looking at a complete version of the message Cyrix had only partially decrypted. Full decryption. Final preparations at 87% completion. Security forces in position. Operation Regicide can commence as scheduled on the day of Ascension. The Empress will be eliminated during the Flame Renewal ceremony, and control will transfer to the Council, without disruption. Public announcement of her death by natural causes has been prepared. All necessary witnesses and medical certification are in place. The compound has been added to her ceremonial wine in increasing doses over the past month. Final administration will render her susceptible to cardiac arrest when the trigger chemical is introduced during the ceremony. The compound is untraceable after death. Awaiting final authorization. End full decryption. Kale felt sick. They had been poisoning her slowly, preparing her body for a final dose that would appear to cause natural death during the most public and symbolic moment of the Ascension ceremony. And they had been doing it for a month, explaining the increasing changes in her behavior that Arkan and Thelen had noticed. He continued searching, finding additional communications that outlined the specifics of the coup, which council members were involved, which were to be eliminated alongside the Empress, how the narrative would be controlled afterward. Vex was to be named Imperial Regent, with emergency powers to stabilize the Empire following the tragic death of its beloved sovereign. Kale copied everything to the data crystal, then erased all traces of his access from the system. He needed to get this information to Arkan immediately, then find a way to reach Lorena before the ceremony. As he was preparing to leave, the door to the server room slid open. Kyle froze, expecting the return technician. Instead, 2 Imperial enforcers stepped in, their weapons drawn. "Security breach detected in this sector," one said, his eyes narrowing as he took in Kale's service uniform and the data crystal in his hand. "Identify yourself." Kale's mind raced. Fighting was not an option. The alarm would bring more enforcers within seconds. Running would be equally futile in the confined space. "System maintenance," he said, sliding the crystal into his pocket as casually as possible. The technician stepped out for a break. "I'm completing the checks for tomorrow's ceremony." "Authentication code," the enforcer demanded, not lowering his weapon. Cale knew any code he invented would be verified instantly through their communication systems. He had seconds to make a decision. "Actually," he said, reaching slowly for his badge, "I have special authorization." In a sudden movement, he pulled the badge free and flung it at the nearest enforcer's face. In the same motion, he grabbed the heavy tray he had carried in and swung it at the second enforcer. The badge was a distraction at best, but the tray connected solidly, sending the second enforcer stumbling backward. Cale didn't wait to see if his advantage would last. He charged forward, shouldering past the first enforcer, who was still reacting to the badge thrown at his face. Out in the corridor, Cale ran. Behind him, he could hear the enforcers calling for backup, their boots pounding as they gave chase. He needed to lose them quickly and get the information to Arkan. He rounded a corner and found himself face to face with a group of servers carrying elaborate floral arrangements for the ceremony. Without breaking stride, he grabbed one of the massive displays and hurled it behind him, creating a barrier of scattered flowers and broken crystal that slowed his pursuers. The palace's service corridors were a labyrinth he knew well, but so did the security forces. His advantage was slim at best. He needed a diversion, something significant enough to draw attention away from his escape. As he ran, he passed a control panel for the palace's environmental systems. A desperate plan formed in his mind. He skidded to a halt, pulled out a small tool from his pocket, a multi-purpose device he'd acquired during his years on the fringe, and quickly accessed the panel. With a few rapid adjustments, he triggered the fire suppression system in the eastern wing of the palace, far from his current position. Alarms began to blare throughout the complex, and he could hear the confusion in the security communications echoing from nearby guards' devices. Using the chaos, Cale slipped into a rarely used passage that connected the service areas to the ceremonial halls. His destination was the Imperial Guard Barracks, where he hoped to find Arkan and share what he had discovered. The passage emptied into a small courtyard used primarily by the palace staff for brief respite from their duties. At this hour, with preparations in full swing, and now an emergency drawing attention, it was deserted. Cale crossed quickly, heading for a side entrance to the barracks. He had nearly reached it when a voice stopped him cold. "That's far enough, Cale Raren." He turned slowly to find Counselor Vex standing in the shadows, flanked by 4 black-uniformed figures that were distinctly not Imperial enforcers. Their armor was more advanced, their weapons non-standard, private security. Then, Vex's personal force. "Counselor," Cale acknowledged, his mind racing for a way out of this confrontation. "Working late? The ascension preparations must be demanding." Vex's thin face showed no emotion. "More than you know, though I suspect you've learned quite a bit about our preparations already." He gestured to one of his guards. "The crystal, if you please." The guard advanced, hand extended for the data crystal in Cale's pocket. "I don't know what you're talking about," Cale said, taking a step back. "I'm just service staff, preparing for tomorrow's ceremony." "Please," Vex said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Our systems detected the intrusion immediately. We simply allowed it to continue while we tracked your location." He smiled thinly. "I must admit, I'm almost impressed. Returning to the palace while under an Imperial removal order, accessing restricted communications. You're either very brave or very foolish." "I could say the same about a counselor planning to murder his empress," Cale replied, abandoning the pretense. Vex didn't even flinch at the accusation. "Politics requires difficult decisions. Raren, Lorena has grown. Unpredictable. The Empire needs stability, direction. The Council can provide that. You mean you can provide that? Kale retorted. With yourself as Imperial Regent. If I read your communications correctly. A flicker of surprise crossed Vex's face. You've been thorough. More reason why you cannot be allowed to interfere. He gestured again to his guard. The crystal. Now, or my men will take it from your corpse. Kale assessed his options. The 4 guards were positioned strategically, cutting off potential escape routes. They were professional, their weapons trained with unwavering precision. Fighting would be suicide. You'll never get away with this, he said, playing for time. The Imperial Guard won't accept your authority. The Imperial Guard will follow orders, as they always have, Vex replied confidently. Especially when those orders come with the Empress's authentication codes, which we now control. And what about the people? Kale demanded. Do you think they'll believe Lorena conveniently died of natural causes, just as you seized power? People believe what they're told to believe, especially when it comes from trusted medical authorities and is supported by irrefutable evidence. Vex's patience was clearly wearing thin. Enough delay. The crystal. Kale's hand moved toward his pocket, then hesitated. You've miscalculated. Vex. The coalition of fringe worlds already knows about your plan. If anything happens to me or to the Empress, they'll release everything they have to every world in the Empire. It was a bluff, but one rooted in enough truth to be credible. Vex's expression darkened. A convenient claim, but unlikely. The coalition is a fragmented alliance of insignificant worlds. They don't have the resources or influence to threaten the Imperial core. Are you willing to bet your coup on that assumption? Kale asked. Because I've ensured that evidence of your conspiracy has been transmitted to key coalition representatives. They may be on the fringe, but they have communication networks that reach every inhabited system. Vex studied him for a long moment, trying to determine if he was bluffing. Even if that were true, it changes nothing. The transition of power will be complete before any such information could be widely disseminated. The coalition will be dealt with afterward. As they spoke, Kale had been subtly shifting his position, inching toward a decorative column at the edge of the courtyard. If he could reach it, he might have a moment of cover to attempt an escape. Last chance, Raren, Vex said, nodding to his guards. The crystal, or we take it. Kale's hand moved to his pocket again, slowly withdrawing the data crystal. He held it up, the small object glinting in the courtyard's dim lighting. You want this? He asked. Then, with a sudden movement, hurled it over Vex's head toward the far side of the courtyard. The guard's attention instinctively followed the crystal's arc, just for a second, but enough. Kale lunged for the column, rolling behind it as weapons fire erupted, scoring the ancient stone where he had stood a moment before. From his position, Kale activated Cyrix's shield generator at full power. The device hummed, creating a momentary energy barrier that would absorb a few direct hits before failing. He needed to move. The courtyard had several exits, the barracks entrance he had been heading for, the service passage he had emerged from, and 2 smaller corridors leading deeper into the palace. The guards were spreading out, trying to flank his position behind the column. Kale reached into his boot and withdrew a small metallic sphere. Another tool from his time on the fringe. One he had hoped not to need. He activated it and tossed it in the direction opposite from his intended escape route. The sphere emitted a blinding flash and a deafening sonic pulse. Even partially shielded by the column, Kale felt the disorienting effect. For the guards and Vex, directly exposed, the impact would be incapacitating. Using the distraction, Kale sprinted across the courtyard toward the barracks entrance. Behind him, he could hear Vex shouting orders through the confusion, but the guards were still recovering from the sonic device. Kale reached the barracks door and slammed his palm against the access panel. Nothing happened. His service badge authorization didn't extend to Imperial Guard facilities. He was trapped in the courtyard with Vex's men, regaining their composure behind him. Then, miraculously, the door slid open. Captain Arkin stood on the threshold, his expression grim. "Inside," he commanded. "Now!" Kale didn't need to be told twice. He dove through the doorway as weapons fire resumed, peppering the closing door as it sealed behind him. "Vex knows," Kyle gasped, trying to catch his breath. "They detected my access to their communications. They know that I know about Operation Regicide." Arkin's face hardened. "And the crystal? The evidence?" "Lost," Kale admitted. "I had to use it as a distraction. But I saw the full message. They've been poisoning her. Arkin, slowly, over the past month. Something that will cause cardiac arrest during tomorrow's ceremony, when they administer the final dose." The captain's expression shifted from skepticism to cold fury. "You're certain of this?" "I saw the communications myself," Kyle insisted. "Vex is to be named Imperial Regent afterward. They have medical authorities prepared to certify her death as natural causes." Arkan turned to a communication panel on the wall. "I need to alert my officers. Increase the Empress's security immediately." "Wait," Kale cautioned. "Vex said they control her authentication codes. If you make any obvious moves, they might accelerate their timeline." The captain paused, considering this. "What do you suggest?" "I need to see her," Kyle said. "Directly, without Vex or his people present. If they've been poisoning her, there might still be time to counteract it before the final dose." Arkin looked torn, the conflict between protocol and the Empress's safety playing across his features. Finally, he reached a decision. "The Empress is in her private chambers, preparing for tomorrow's ceremony. The Guard controls access to that wing, not the Council's enforcers." He fixed Kale with an intense stare. "If you're wrong about this, Raren." "I'm not," Kyle said firmly. "You know something's been wrong with her. This explains it." After a moment, Arkin nodded. "Follow me, and stay close. The barracks connect to the royal wing through a secure passage. Few know of its existence." They moved quickly through the Imperial Guard quarters, passing training rooms and armories. The guards they encountered saluted Arkin, but gave Kyle curious looks, clearly recognizing him despite his service uniform. "My men are loyal," Arkan assured him, noting his concern. "But we must move quickly before Vex realizes where you've gone." The secure passage was hidden behind what appeared to be an ordinary storage room. Arkin activated a concealed mechanism, and a section of the wall slid aside, revealing a narrow corridor lit by soft blue lighting. "This was built during the reign of Lorena's grandfather," Arkan explained as they entered. "A precaution against palace insurrection. It allows the Guard to reach the royal family without using main corridors that might be compromised." The passage was short, ending at another concealed door. Arkan placed his palm on an authentication panel, and the door slid open to reveal an antechamber decorated in the imperial colors of deep blue and gold. Two guards stood at attention, their expressions registering surprise at Kale's presence. "Captain," one began, "the exile is not permitted. By my authority. He is granted temporary access." Arkin interrupted. "Security Protocol 7-3. The Empress may be in danger." The guards exchanged glances, but stepped aside. Their loyalty to Arkin outweighed their confusion. "Her chambers are through there," Arkin said, indicating an ornate door at the far end of the antechamber. "I cannot accompany you further without her explicit permission. Even as captain of the Guard, there are boundaries I must respect." Kyle understood. The royal chambers were the Empress's most private domain, where even the highest officials entered only by invitation. "What should I tell the Empress?" one of the guards asked uncertainly. "Nothing yet," Arkin instructed. "Maintain your posts and alert no one of his presence until I give the order. If anyone attempts to enter, anyone at all, regardless of rank or authorization, deny them and contact me immediately." The guards acknowledged the command, though their expressions revealed their unease with the unusual situation. Kale approached the door to Lorena's chambers, his heart pounding. 3 years of exile, of wondering if he would ever see her again. And now, he was about to enter her most private space, uninvited, bearing news of a conspiracy against her life. He looked back at Arkin, who gave him a single nod of encouragement. Then, gathering his courage, Kale knocked on the door. For a long moment, there was silence. Then a voice, her voice, called out, "Enter!" Kale opened the door and stepped into the Empress's private chambers. The room was large but not ostentatious, its elegance deriving from the quality of its furnishings rather than excessive ornamentation. The walls were lined with bookshelves holding actual paper volumes, a rare luxury in the digital age. A writing desk stood before tall windows that offered a view of the capital city's nighttime panorama. Warm light came from crystal fixtures that contained captured fragments of Pyroterra's eternal flames. Lorena sat at the desk, her back to the door, apparently reviewing documents on a holographic display. She wore a simple robe of deep blue rather than her formal court attire, her hair falling loose down her back, rather than arranged in the elaborate style she favored for public appearances. "I requested not to be disturbed until morning," she said without turning, her voice carrying that same imperial authority Kale remembered. "The preparations can wait." "Even preparations for treason?" Kale asked softly. Lorena went utterly still. Slowly, she turned, and Kale saw her face clearly for the first time since the throne room. She was still beautiful. That hadn't changed. But there was a pallor to her skin that hadn't been there before, a slight hollowness to her cheeks. Her eyes, when they met his, widened in shock. "Kyle," she whispered, her composure slipping for the first time. Why are you here?" "I came back," he said simply. "Despite your orders. Despite everything." Lorena rose from her chair, her movements lacking their usual fluid grace. "You shouldn't be here. You can't be here. If the Council discovers—" "The Council is planning to kill you tomorrow," Kale interrupted. "During the flame renewal ceremony. Vex will become Imperial Regent afterward." She stared at him, disbelief warring with something else in her expression. Fear, perhaps, or recognition of a truth she had suspected, but not confirmed. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Councillor Vex has been loyal to the throne for decades. He served my father." "He's been poisoning you," Kale pressed, taking a step closer. "Slowly, over the past month. Haven't you felt it? The weakness, the mental fog, the difficulty concentrating." Lorena's hand moved unconsciously to her throat. "There was an illness. They said it would take time to fully recover." "Not an illness," Kale said. "A poison. Administered in small doses. Probably in your wine. Tomorrow, during the ceremony. They'll give you the final dose, something that will trigger cardiac arrest. They've already prepared the story of your natural death and arranged for medical certification." Lorena sank back into her chair, the implications washing over her. "How do you know this?" "I accessed their secure communications," Kale explained. "It's all there. Operation Regicide. The detailed plans. The medical arrangements. Vex caught me in the act, but not before I saw everything." "And you came to warn me," she said, studying his face. "Despite my exile. Despite everything I said in the throne room." "Yes." That single word hung between them, heavy with all it implied. Kale had risked everything, his freedom, his life, to return to a woman who had ordered him never to approach her again. Lorena's expression softened, a glimpse of the woman he had known beneath the imperial facade. "You said I would miss you," she murmured. "In the throne room." "And you said nothing," Kale reminded her. "What could I say?" she asked, a hint of the old fire returning to her eyes. "With the entire court watching? With Vex and his faction waiting for any sign of weakness?" "The truth," Kyle suggested. "That would have been a start, Lorena looked away. The truth is complicated. It always is, Kyle acknowledged. But right now, there's a simpler truth we need to address. Your life is in danger, and we need to act. She nodded, her expression hardening into the resolute look he remembered from countless diplomatic crises they had navigated together. What do you propose? First, we need to get you medical attention, Kyle said. If they've been poisoning you, the effects need to be treated before they become permanent. I can't simply summon Imperial physicians without explanation, Lorena pointed out. Many are aligned with the Council. If Vex discovers that I know of his plans— Captain Arkin is outside, Kale informed her. He can bring someone trustworthy, someone outside the regular palace medical staff. Lorena considered this. There is a doctor in the lower city, Dr. Malin. She treated my mother in her final days, away from the court physicians. She can be trusted. Good, Kyle said. I'll have Arkin send for her immediately. Second, we need evidence of the conspiracy that will convince those still loyal to you. The communications you accessed? Lost, Kale admitted. But there may be another way. The poison they've been giving you, it must be somewhere in your chambers. Probably in the wine you're served regularly. Lorena's gaze darted to a small table near the window, where a carafe of deep red liquid sat alongside a single crystal glass. That's prepared specially for me each evening. A blend from the Imperial vineyards. Only Vex and a few trusted servants have access to the preparation. Perfect, Kale said grimly. If we can analyze it and find the poison, we'll have physical evidence of their plot. He moved to the door and opened it slightly, gesturing for Arkin to approach. When the captain reached the threshold, Kale quickly outlined what they needed. Dr. Malin brought secretly to the palace, and someone who could analyze the wine for poisons. I know who to call for the analysis, Arkin said. There's a chemist in the guard, formerly with Imperial intelligence. He can be trusted. Good, Kale said. And have your most loyal men ready. If we confirm the poison, we'll need to move quickly to secure Vex and his co-conspirators. Arkin nodded and withdrew to make the arrangements. Kale closed the door and turned back to Lorena, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You've changed, she observed. There's a hardness to you that wasn't there before. Exile does that, Kale replied, more sharply than he intended. He softened his tone. So does watching everything you care about threatened from a distance, unable to intervene. Lorena rose from her chair and moved toward him, her steps measured but determined. Why did you really come back, Kyle? The truth. I told you, to warn you about the coup. And if there had been no coup, she pressed, if everything had been as it seemed on the surface, would you still have found a way back to my throne room? The question caught him off guard. I don't know, he admitted. I wanted to. Every day in exile. I thought about returning, about making you face me again. But what would have been the point? You made your choice. Did I? Lorena asked softly. Or was that choice made for me? She was close enough now that Kale could see the faint golden flecks in her blue eyes, could smell the familiar scent of fire blossoms that she had always favored. What are you saying? He asked. I'm saying that perhaps neither of us has been entirely free to choose our paths these past 3 years. She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve, a tentative gesture, so unlike the confident Empress. The illness, the poisoning, it didn't begin a month ago. Kyle, it began shortly after you left. Subtle at first, clouding my judgment, making me susceptible to suggestion. Kale's breath caught. You think they've been influencing you for 3 years? I know they have, she said with quiet certainty. There were moments of clarity, brief periods when I felt like myself again. During those times, I would try to understand what was happening, why I was making decisions that felt wrong, why I was allowing the Council to assume powers I had never intended to grant them. And my exile, Kyle asked. The question that had haunted him for 3 years, finally spoken aloud. Lorena's eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to reach into her soul. The charges were fabricated, as you suspected. But my reaction to them, that was manipulated. They knew that removing you would eliminate their most formidable obstacle. You knew the Empire too well, had too many connections outside the palace walls, and you knew me too well. The implications were staggering. If Vex and his faction had been poisoning Lorena for years, subtly influencing her decisions while increasing their own power, then everything that had happened, the trade restrictions that sparked rebellion in the fringe worlds, the increased militarization of border regions, the concentration of authority in the council, all of it was part of a longer-term strategy. They've been playing a deeper game than I realized, Kale said, the pieces falling into place. Not just a coup, but a complete restructuring of power in the Empire, with them at the center. Yes, Lorena agreed. And tomorrow was to be the culmination. My death during the most symbolic ceremony of the year. The transfer of power to Vex as regent. And then permanent control. Kale finished. With no one left to challenge their authority. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Arkan entered, his expression tense. Dr. Malin is on her way, brought through the secure passage, he reported. And Specialist Tovan is preparing to analyze the wine. But we have another problem. Councillor Vex has called an emergency meeting of the Imperial Council, citing a security breach in the palace. He's demanding access to all security systems and guard deployments. He's accelerating his timeline, Kale realized. He knows we're onto him. What are our options? Lorena asked, her voice steady despite the crisis. Limited, Arkan admitted. The Guard is loyal, but we're outnumbered by the combined force of Imperial enforcers and Vex's private security. Without solid evidence of the conspiracy, I cannot justify taking action against members of the Imperial Council. Then we need that evidence quickly, Kale said. And we need to ensure the Empress's safety until we have it. The secure bunker beneath the palace, Arkan suggested. Designed for planetary emergencies. Only the Empress and the Guard have access. We could move you there until we confirm the poison and secure Vex. Lorena shook her head. If I suddenly disappear, especially on the eve of the Ascension ceremony, it will alert Vex that his plan has been discovered. He might move against us immediately, before we're ready. She's right, Kale agreed. We need to maintain the appearance of normalcy, while we gather evidence and prepare our response. Arkan looked troubled. That puts the Empress at considerable risk. I've been at risk for longer than any of us realized, Lorena said with quiet determination. A few more hours will make little difference. But we must use that time wisely. Another knock, and a guard entered with Specialist Tovan, a stern-faced woman with short gray hair and the bearing of someone who had seen combat. She carried a small case of equipment and moved directly to the wine carafe without preamble. I'll need a sample of your blood as well, Your Majesty, she said, her tone professional but respectful. To compare against any substances I find in the wine. Lorena nodded, rolling up her sleeve. Do what you need to do, Specialist. As Tovan began her work. Kale paced the chamber, his mind racing through possibilities. We need a plan for tomorrow, he said. Regardless of what we find in the wine, Vex will be suspicious. He knows I've discovered something. He believes you lost the evidence, Arkan pointed out. But he can't be certain, Kale countered. He'll be watching for any change in security, any deviation from the planned ceremony. Lorena considered this. Then perhaps we should give him exactly what he expects, the ceremony, proceeding as planned. Kale stopped pacing. You can't be serious. Even if we neutralize the poison they've already given you, they'll still try to administer the final dose during the ceremony. Yes, Lorena agreed, a glint of her old strategic brilliance shining through. And when they do, we'll have them. caught in the act, before the entire court, and visiting dignitaries from throughout the empire. "It's too risky," Arkan objected. "We cannot use the Empress as bait." "Do you have a better suggestion, Captain?" Lorena asked, an edge of imperial authority returning to her voice. "If we move against Vex without irrefutable evidence, it becomes his word against ours. Half the court will believe him, and we risk civil war within the Empire." The room fell silent as they all processed the gravity of the situation. Specialist Tovan continued her work, now analyzing samples of both the wine and Lorena's blood with portable equipment from her case. Finally, Kale spoke. "There may be a way to let the ceremony proceed while minimizing the risk." He turned to Lorena. "During the flame renewal, when do they intend to administer the final poison?" "The ceremonial toast," she replied. "Each member of the council presents a cup to the Empress, who drinks from each as a symbol of shared responsibility for the Empire's prosperity." "And how many cups?" "7, one from each counselor." Kale nodded. "The beginnings of a plan forming. Then we know when and how they'll make their move. We just need to ensure that what you actually drink is harmless." "A substitution?" Arkan asked, intrigued despite his concerns. "Exactly," Kale confirmed. "We prepare identical cups containing untainted wine. During the ceremony, through careful choreography, we ensure the Empress receives our cups rather than theirs." "How?" Lorena asked. "The exchange is conducted before hundreds of witnesses. Any obvious switch would be noticed immediately." "Not if it happens before the ceremony," Kyle explained. "The cups are prepared in advance, blessed by the temple priests, and brought to the ceremonial hall on trays. If we can access them during that preparation phase." "My guards can ensure that access," Arkan said, warming to the idea. "We oversee all security for ritual objects." "Then we let the ceremony proceed," Kale continued. Vex and his co-conspirators believe they're witnessing their plan unfold. But instead of collapsing from cardiac arrest, the Empress remains standing. In that moment of confusion, we strike, arresting the conspirators before they can react. Lorena considered the plan. "It could work," she admitted. "But it would require perfect execution." "I have confirmation," Tovan interrupted, looking up from her equipment with a grim expression. "The wine contains trace amounts of a compound I've seen before, a neural suppressant developed for military interrogations. Non-lethal in small doses, but it can make the subject highly suggestible and cloud rational thought. Over time, with repeated exposure." She glanced at Lorena. "It would explain the symptoms you've been experiencing, Your Majesty." "And my blood?" Lorena asked. "Shows clear evidence of prolonged exposure," Tovan confirmed. "I'm also detecting another compound, something designed to weaken cardiac function gradually. Undetectable in small doses, but potentially fatal when combined with a triggering agent." "The final poison in tomorrow's ceremonial cup," Kale said. Tovan nodded. "Precisely. The combination would cause what would appear to be a natural heart failure. Nearly impossible to detect in an autopsy, unless the examiner knew exactly what to look for." "Can you identify a specific source?" Arkan asked. "Something that would tie it directly to Vex or his associates?" "The compounds are specialized," Tovan replied. "Military grade, restricted access. I can trace the authorization codes for any such substances released from Imperial stores." "Do it," Arkan ordered. "We need a direct connection to Vex." Another knock at the door announced the arrival of Dr. Malin, a small, elderly woman with calm eyes and hands that spoke of decades of healing. She moved immediately to Lorena's side, her manner respectful, but without the excessive deference common at court. "Captain Arkan says you've been poisoned, Empress," she said directly. "How long?" "Years, apparently," Lorena replied, "though I only learned of it tonight." Dr. Malin began a thorough examination, her experienced hands checking Lorena's pulse, examining her eyes, testing her reflexes. The symptoms? Fatigue, difficulty concentrating, Periods of confusion, particularly when making important decisions, increased susceptibility to suggestion. The doctor nodded as if confirming a suspicion. And physical symptoms? Weakness? Palpitations? Both, Lorena admitted, particularly in recent weeks. Can you treat it? Cale asked, watching the examination with growing concern. The neural suppressant can be counteracted, Dr. Malin said confidently. I have compounds that will accelerate its removal from her system. The cardiac toxin is more concerning. It has likely caused some degree of damage already. Can it be reversed? Arkin asked. Partially, the doctor replied. With the right treatment, the Empress should recover much of her normal cardiac function. But it will take time, weeks, perhaps months of careful therapy. We don't have weeks, Cale pointed out. We need her at her strongest for tomorrow's ceremony. Dr. Malin opened her medical bag and removed several vials. I can administer a temporary treatment, something to bolster her heart function and clear her mind for the next 24 hours. But it's not a cure, merely a stopgap. Do it, Lorena commanded. Whatever risk it carries, it's necessary. As the doctor prepared her medications, Arkin moved closer to Cale. This plan of yours, he said quietly. It places the Empress in considerable danger, even with these precautions. I know, Cale acknowledged, but it also offers our best chance of exposing Vex and his conspirators publicly, in a way that cannot be denied or covered up. And if something goes wrong, Arkin pressed, if they realize the substitution and change tactics, then we improvise, Cale said grimly. But one way or another, they will not succeed. Not while I draw breath. The captain studied him for a moment, then nodded. I believe you mean that. He extended his hand. Whatever our past differences, Kyle Rarin, it seems we now stand together. Cale clasped the offered hand. For her, he said softly. Always for her. Across the room, Lorena submitted to Dr. Malin's treatment, her eyes occasionally finding Cale's as they worked out the details of tomorrow's dangerous countermove. In those glances was something Cale had feared he would never see again. Trust, connection, and perhaps, if he dared to hope, something more. The day of ascension dawned with the red-orange glow, particular to Pyrotera's binary stars. Throughout the capital, citizens prepared for the most significant ceremony of the imperial calendar, the day when, 17 years earlier, Lorena had taken the throne following her father's death. In the palace, preparations had reached a fever pitch. The great ceremonial hall was decorated with banners representing all the worlds of the empire. The transparent floor sections, polished to a high shine, revealing the controlled lava flows beneath that symbolized the power and vitality of Pyrotera itself. Dignitaries from 100 worlds filled the guest quarters, representatives of every major power and countless minor ones, all gathered to pay homage to the Empress on this day of renewal. The Imperial Guard, resplendent in ceremonial armor that concealed additional combat capabilities, maintained a vigilant presence throughout. In her private chambers, Lorena prepared for the ceremony with the assistance of her most trusted attendants. Dr. Malin's treatment had worked remarkably well. The fog that had clouded her mind for so long had lifted, and with it came a clarity and resolve that had been absent for years. "How do you feel, Your Majesty?" asked her chief attendant, adjusting the elaborate ceremonial robes of deep blue and gold. "Better than I have in a very long time," Lorena replied, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Like myself again." The attendant smiled, pleased, but clearly unaware of the true significance of the statement. "The people will be overjoyed to see you." The Ascension celebrations in the city began at dawn. Lorena nodded, her thoughts turning to the dangerous game that would unfold in the coming hours. Cale and Arkin had worked through the night, preparing their countermove against Vex's conspiracy. The ceremonial cups had been prepared, duplicates identical to the originals, but filled with untainted wine. The Imperial Guard had been subtly repositioned, with those most loyal to Arkan stationed closest to the ceremonial dais. Specialist Tovan had traced the source of the poisons to a secured Imperial facility, accessed using Vex's authorization codes. The evidence was damning, but they needed more. They needed the conspirators to reveal themselves before witnesses whose testimony could not be questioned. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of the Imperial Herald, come to escort her to the pre-ceremony rituals. Lorena took a final look at herself in the mirror, seeing not just the Empress in her finery, but the woman beneath, the woman who had been slowly poisoned and manipulated for years, who had been forced to exile the man she loved, whose very mind had been clouded by those she trusted. That ended today. The ceremonial hall was filled to capacity, the assembled dignitaries and courtiers, creating a sea of color and movement beneath the vaulted ceiling. The Imperial Council had taken their positions on the lower tier of the dais, each member wearing the formal robes of their office. Vex stood at their center, his thin face composed in an expression of solemn dignity that now struck Lorena as utterly false. Kyle, disguised as a member of the ceremonial guard, stood at one corner of the dais, his face partially concealed by a decorative helmet. The plan called for him to remain hidden until the critical moment, a secret weapon whose presence was known only to Lorena, Arkan, and a handful of trusted Imperial guards. The herald's staff struck the floor 3 times, the sound echoing through the hall. All rise for Her Imperial Majesty, Empress Lorena of Pyroterra and the 100 Worlds, Sovereign of the Eternal Flame, Protector of the Cosmic Peace. Every person in the hall stood as the great doors opened, and Lorena entered, flanked by her ceremonial escort. She moved with measured steps down the central aisle, acknowledging the bows and curtsies with slight nods. Her face remained serene, betraying nothing of the tension and anticipation she felt. As she approached the dais, she could see Vex watching her closely, perhaps looking for signs that the slow poisoning had weakened her sufficiently for their final move. What he saw instead was an Empress in full command of herself, moving with a strength and purpose that had been absent in recent public appearances. A flicker of concern crossed his face, quickly masked. Good, Lorena thought. Let him worry. Let him wonder. She ascended the steps to the upper tier of the dais, taking her place before the obsidian throne. The ceremony began with the traditional invocations, priests of the eternal flame offering prayers for the continued prosperity of the empire and the health of its sovereign. Throughout these preliminaries, Lorena maintained the expected expressions of solemn attention, while her mind remained sharply focused on the critical moment to come, the ritual of shared prosperity, when each counselor would present her with a ceremonial cup. After the prayers came the renewal of oaths, with representatives from major worlds stepping forward to reaffirm their loyalty to the throne. Lorena received each pledge with formal acknowledgement, all the while watching the council from the corner of her eye. They seemed calm, confident, unaware that their plans had been discovered. Finally, the herald announced the ritual of shared prosperity. Attendants brought forward a ceremonial table, placing it before the throne. Another group of attendants, Imperial guards disguised as ritual servants, part of Arkan's careful planning, entered carrying trays with the 7 cups. These were the substituted cups, filled with untainted wine. The switch had been made hours earlier, during the ritual blessing conducted by the temple priests. The original cups, now secured as evidence, had indeed contained the triggering poison that would have caused Lorena's heart to fail during the ceremony. Vex rose first, as senior counselor, and approached the table. He selected a cup, believing it to be the one he had personally prepared, and turned to face Lorena. "On this day of ascension," he intoned, his voice carrying throughout the hall, "I offer this cup as symbol of the Council's shared responsibility for the Empire's prosperity. May the wisdom that guides your rule continue to flourish. Empress Lorena." The formal words carried a double meaning, now that Lorena knew his true intentions. She accepted the cup with equal formality, raising it slightly in acknowledgement before taking a careful sip. The wine was rich and flavorful, untainted by the poison that would have been her death. One by one, the other counselors repeated the ritual, each approaching with a cup, offering the traditional words, watching as she drank. 3 of them, Lorena knew from Tovan's investigation, were part of Vex's conspiracy. The others were either unwitting pawns or had been kept ignorant of the plot. With each cup she drained, Lorena could see the anticipation building in Vex's eyes, the subtle tension in his posture as he waited for the poison to take effect. According to the conspiracy's timeline, she should begin showing symptoms after the 4th cup. A slight tremor in her hands, perhaps, or a sheen of perspiration on her brow. But she remained steady, her gaze clear, her hands firm as she accepted the 5th cup, then the 6th. By the 7th cup, Vex's composure had begun to crack. His eyes darted to his fellow conspirators, a silent question passing between them. Something had gone wrong with their carefully laid plan. Lorena drained the final cup and set it down on the ceremonial table. According to the traditional ceremony, she would now rise and offer a prayer of thanksgiving for the Empire's continued prosperity. Instead, she remained seated, her gaze fixing on Vex with an intensity that made him visibly uncomfortable. "Counselor Vex," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "You seem troubled. Did you expect a different outcome from this ritual?" The question, so far from the scripted ceremony, sent a ripple of confusion through the assembled dignitaries. Vex's expression froze, his mind clearly racing to understand what had happened and how to respond. "Your Majesty," he began, recovering quickly, "I am merely concerned for your well-being. The ceremony is taxing, and your health has been delicate in recent months." "How interesting that you should mention my health," Lorena replied, rising from her throne. "Particularly since you have taken such a personal interest in it. Or should I say, such a personal hand in undermining it." Gasps and murmurs spread through the hall. Vex's face paled, but he maintained his composure. "I don't understand what you mean, Empress. My only concern has ever been for your welfare and the stability of the Empire." "A convenient claim," Lorena said, her voice hardening. "But one contradicted by evidence," she gestured, and Captain Arkin stepped forward, holding a data crystal. "This contains records of unauthorized access to restricted military compounds, neural suppressants and cardiac toxins, accessed using your authentication codes. Counselor." Vex's eyes widened fractionally, but he rallied. "A fabrication. Someone has clearly compromised security protocols to implicate me in some imagined conspiracy." "Not imagined," came a new voice, as Kale removed his ceremonial helmet and stepped forward. "Documented in your own communications. Operation Regicide, the systematic poisoning of the Empress, culminating in her death during today's ceremony, to be followed by your appointment as Imperial Regent." The hall erupted in shocked exclamations. The Imperial Guards moved subtly, positioning themselves to block potential escape routes for the counselors. "This is outrageous," Vex sputtered, looking around at his fellow counselors for support. Some looked genuinely shocked, while others, his co-conspirators, had expressions of barely concealed panic. The word of an exile? A condemned criminal? Against a loyal servant of the Empire? "Not just his word," Lorena countered. "The evidence is substantial and incontrovertible. The ceremonial cups you prepared for today's ritual have been analyzed and found to contain a compound that, when combined with the toxins you've been administering to me for months, would have caused fatal cardiac arrest." She descended the steps of the dais until she stood directly before Vex. "For years, you have poisoned not just my body, but my mind. You influenced my decisions, isolated me from those whose counsel I trusted, and gradually assumed powers never intended for the council. Vex's facade finally cracked, his face contorted with rage and desperation. You were weak, he hissed. Too concerned with balance and compromise to see what the Empire truly needs: strength, order, decisive action. Your father understood this. He would never have allowed the fringe world such latitude, never have hesitated to crush dissent. My father ruled in a different time, Lorena replied calmly. And I am not my father. Clearly, Vex sneered. Which is why the Empire has begun to fracture under your rule. The coalition grows bolder, the border worlds more restless. Without firm guidance, the Empire will collapse within a generation. And you appointed yourself that guide? Kale asked, moving to stand beside Lorena. Decided that the only solution was to seize power through murder and deception. Vex's gaze shifted to Kale, hatred burning in his eyes. You, always you, interfering, whispering in her ear, advocating for weakness disguised as diplomacy. He laughed bitterly. Exiling you was the one service I managed to perform for the Empire, though it seems even that was temporary. His admission, spoken in anger, echoed through the hall, confirmation of his role in Kale's false prosecution. Captain Arkin, Lorena said, her voice once again the embodiment of imperial authority. Arrest Councillor Vex and his co-conspirators for treason against the throne, attempted regicide, and crimes against the Empire. With pleasure, Your Majesty, Arkin replied, signaling his guards to move in. What happened next unfolded with shocking speed. Vex, realizing his defeat, reached into his ceremonial robes and withdrew a concealed weapon, a small energy pistol, compact but lethal at close range. Before anyone could react, he aimed it directly at Lorena's heart. If I cannot guide the Empire, he snarled, then perhaps it deserves to fall. Kale moved without thinking, throwing himself between Lorena and the weapon as Vex fired. The energy bolt struck him in the shoulder, searing through cloth and flesh with a smell of burned fabric and tissue. He staggered, but remained standing, shielding Lorena with his body. Imperial guards swarmed forward, subduing Vex and disarming him before he could fire again. The other conspirators, seeing their leader's desperate act, surrendered without resistance. Lorena caught Kale as he stumbled, supporting his weight as they both sank to the floor of the dais. Blood seeped through his ceremonial uniform, where the energy bolt had struck. "Medical team!" Arkin shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos that had erupted in the hall. "Now!" Lorena cradled Kale's head, her imperial mask completely discarded in her concern. "Why?" she demanded, tears forming in her eyes. "Why would you do that?" Despite the pain, Kale managed a smile. "You know why," he said softly. "I told you in the throne room, remember? You'd miss me." "I did," she whispered, her fingers gentle against his face. "Every day, even when I couldn't remember why, even when their poison clouded everything else. I missed you." The palace medical team arrived, pushing through the crowd of stunned dignitaries. As they prepared to move Kale to the medical facility, Lorena leaned down and spoke directly into his ear. Words meant only for him. "When you recover, and you will recover, Kale Raren, we have much to discuss. About the Empire, about the changes that must be made, and about us." Kale's eyes, clouded with pain but still alert, met hers. "I'll hold you to that, Empress." "Not Empress," she corrected gently. "Not when we're alone. Just Lorena." As the medical team lifted him onto a hovering stretcher, Kale reached out and caught her hand. "I'll see you soon, Lorena." She nodded, then straightened, composing herself once more into the Empress as Kale was rushed from the hall. The assembled dignitaries watched in stunned silence, witnesses to both an attempted coup and an unmistakable display of personal feeling from their sovereign. Lorena turned to face them, her expression resolute. "What you have witnessed today is both a tragedy and an opportunity," she declared, her voice steady despite the emotions roiling beneath. A tragedy that those entrusted with the empire's governance would betray that trust so completely, but an opportunity to reconsider how that governance should function in the future. She ascended the steps back to her throne, but did not sit. Instead, she stood before it, addressing the hall with renewed authority. "For too long, I have allowed the council to accumulate powers beyond their rightful scope. Some of that was due to their manipulation. Yes, but some was my own failure to recognize the danger until it was almost too late." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled representatives. "That changes today. The empire must evolve if it is to survive and thrive. The concerns of the fringe worlds must be heard. The balance of power must be restored." As Lorena continued outlining her vision for the empire's future, Captain Arkin oversaw the removal of Vex and his co-conspirators. The ceremonial hall, which had nearly witnessed an empress's assassination, instead became the birthplace of a new imperial covenant. And in the palace medical facility, skilled physicians worked to repair the damage done to Kael Raren, the exile who had returned to save not just the woman he loved, but the empire she ruled. His final thought before the sedatives took effect was of Lorena's words. Not Empress, but Lorena, and the promise they held for a future neither of them had dared to imagine during the long years of separation. 3 months after the day of ascension, Kael stood on the private balcony of the imperial residence, watching as the twin suns of Pira Terra set behind the distant volcanic peaks. His shoulder had healed well, though it still ached during changes in the weather, a small price to pay for the outcome. The doors behind him slid open, and Lorena stepped out to join him. She wore simple attire, having discarded the formal imperial robes after a day of diplomatic meetings. The treatments Dr. Malin had prescribed had restored her health. The poison gradually purged from her system. Her mind and body returned to their natural strength. "The coalition representatives have agreed to the new trade terms," she said, coming to stand beside him at the railing. They seemed particularly pleased with the provision for direct representation in the reformed council. "They should be," Kael replied. "It's more than they initially asked for." "It's what should have been offered years ago," Lorena acknowledged. Before Vex and his faction began pushing for isolation and control, the aftermath of the failed coup had been tumultuous, but ultimately transformative. Vex and his closest conspirators had been tried and convicted of treason. The Imperial Council had been dissolved and reconstituted with new checks on its authority. Representatives from the fringe worlds had been invited to the capital to participate in shaping a more balanced governance structure. And Kael Raren, once exiled on false charges, had been officially exonerated and appointed as the Empress's special envoy for Outer Realm affairs, a position that recognized his unique understanding of the Empire's diverse worlds and peoples. "Any word from Cyrix?" Lorena asked. Kael smiled. The Technomancer had played a crucial role in exposing the conspiracy, yet had disappeared back into the Undercity before any official recognition could be offered. Still declining any formal position," he replied. "But I've heard rumors of remarkable technological innovations emerging from the smelters district. Innovations that somehow find their way to communities that need them most, regardless of official distribution channels." "A useful arrangement," Lorena observed. "Perhaps some regulations are best selectively enforced." "A revolutionary perspective from the Empress of the 100 Worlds," Kael teased gently. "I've learned that rigidity breeds rebellion," she said, turning to face him. "In governance and in personal matters." The air between them shifted, charged with the connection they had both fought to deny during his exile and her manipulation. "Speaking of personal matters," Kael said, his voice softening, "have you considered my proposal?" After his recovery, as they had worked together to reshape the Empire's governance, They had carefully rebuilt their personal relationship as well. The feelings that had never truly died during their separation had re-emerged, stronger for having survived such trials. But Kale's proposal, that they formalize their relationship, not as empress and subject but as equals, had implications that extended far beyond their private happiness. No empress in Piraterra's history had ever taken a consort who was not of noble birth, let alone a former exile from the fringe worlds. "I have considered it," Lorena replied, her expression serious. "From every angle, as an empress must. The political implications, the potential resistance from traditionalists, the precedent it would set." Kale nodded, trying to prepare himself for rejection cloaked in imperial necessity. "And your conclusion?" Instead of answering directly, Lorena reached up and removed the golden circlet from her brow, the symbol of imperial authority she rarely set aside, even in private. She placed it carefully on the balcony railing. "My conclusion," she said, stepping closer to him, "is that I have spent too many years allowing others to dictate the boundaries of my life, whether through manipulation or tradition or the weight of imperial protocol." Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "I will not make that mistake again." Kale's heart raced. "Does that mean—" "It means yes," Lorena said simply. "Yes to your proposal. Yes to reshaping tradition. Yes to a future where the Empress of the 100 Worlds chooses her own path, including who stands beside her on it." Kale pulled her close, his arms encircling her waist. "There will be resistance," he warned. "The noble houses, the religious authorities." "Let them resist," Lorena interrupted, a spark of the fire that had first drawn him to her flashing in her eyes. "They will learn, as Vex did, that I am not easily swayed from a course I believe in." "And you believe in this, in us?" In answer, Lorena reached up and drew his face down to hers. Their kiss was both a promise and a declaration, of love that had survived exile and conspiracy, of a bond that transcended the boundaries of station and tradition. When they finally parted, the twin suns had set, leaving the sky ablaze with the colors of transition, neither day nor night, but the beautiful threshold between them. "I told you you'd miss me," Kale murmured against her hair. Lorena laughed, the sound free and genuine. "You were right," she admitted. "Even when I couldn't remember why, even when their poison clouded everything else, I missed you." "And now?" he asked. She drew back slightly to meet his gaze, her expression serene, yet determined. "Now, Kale Raren, I don't intend to miss you ever again." As night fell over Piraterra, the Empress and her chosen consort remained on the balcony, planning their future and that of the empire they would guide together, an empire being reborn from the ashes of conspiracy and isolation into something stronger, more balanced, and ultimately more enduring. In the throne room below, where obsidian pillars rose like frozen titans and the floor glowed with the light of controlled magma flows, the imperial seat stood empty for the evening, but it would not remain so. Tomorrow, Lorena would return to it, not as a puppet of shadowy counselors, but as the sovereign she was always meant to be, clear-eyed, resolute, and no longer alone.